Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to this channel. I'm going to tell you what it's all about. My plan basically is to go out and capture the best footage possible, the best photos, the best video footage. I'm going to go out to, different locations, go and visit places, travel around a bit, just see some really interesting stuff. And, I bought a little Canon M50 recently, and I'm just getting into cameras. I'm not a camera expert, but the goal is, over many videos, to try and learn as much about cameras as possible. So it's not the most professional camera in the world, but I mean, it's a good little camera to get started with. I suppose I know a little more about editing, with like Premiere Pro, things like that, so I'm gonna go into some of those areas as well. And along the way, I hope to be, going to some cool little locations and traveling around, just to see some cool stuff. So as you can see for now, not all of the footage turns out that great, but this one, yeah, I like this one. So what's the backstory to all of this? Well, I love travel and I'm living in Taipei City at the moment. And, I bought this little Canon M50 recently to shoot a bunch of courses, and I just figured like, wow, this little thing is pretty cool. And, I started getting into cameras, and I thought, let me just go into some random neighborhood or, areas around Taipei City, and let me try and figure out how this thing works. And over a few months, I learned, the basics of aperture and ISO and shutter speed, things like that. I know they all let in different amounts of light kind of naturally and artificially with ISO, but let me go out and try and play around with these settings. So I set the camera to manual mode and, without much experience at all, and now I'm gonna look back at the shots. And you know what? All of this was shot like 2 or 3 months ago before the virus hit, so, I'm gonna try my best to remember what I was thinking about back then. I know from playing music for years that it's not about the guitar, for example. You don't need the most expensive guitar in the world to play good music. You can make some really good music with a little nylon string guitar. So I'm guessing it's the same with photography. I know with music it's more about the feeling that you put in. It doesn't really, the instrument matters, but it has to be good enough, but it's more about the feeling that you put into this stuff. So I'm just going to jump back to one of these previous shots. So I think the first mistake that I made here was that I think the ISO is very low, because this was just getting into the evening, it was getting a little dark, and I don't think I needed such a low ISO. So, well, what is ISO? So from my basic understanding, ISO refers to the sensitivity of the sensor that is in your camera. So you have aperture and shutter speed, and those two things naturally or mechanically allowing more or less light. They allow more or less light to hit the sensor. But now with the sensor, you can set it to have a very high sensitivity to light or a very low sensitivity to light. And for the Canon M50, a low sensitivity would be all the way at the bottom it's at 200, and then when you go all the way up to the top, to make the sensor more sensitive to light, it goes all the way up to like 12,800, I think. But if you go higher with the ISO or sensitivity, then you run the risk of introducing more kind of a noise or like a grainy look to your footage. But for a low ISO of 200, it seems like you only need that for very, very bright situations where you just have so much light coming into hitting the sensor. So I really don't know why I used such a low ISO here, getting into the evening, it was getting a little dark. Well, what about aperture? Well, just think about your eye, your pupil, and when your pupils dilate, they're basically trying to get as much light in as possible. And when your pupils narrow, that constricts the amount of light coming in. So it's the same idea for aperture. If you look directly into your camera lens, if you look close enough, you can see this weird kind of mechanical looking pupil. And that mechanical looking pupil opens wider to let more light in, and it also narrows to let in less light. So I remember going around this evening and going into the settings and thinking like, man, I can't open this aperture wide enough, it's at the limit. And then what I found out is that you can actually buy what they call fast lenses, which give you like a greater range with the aperture. And these are better for nighttime photography because they let more light in. So yeah, I'm going to try and buy one of those next. So the first mistake here was a low ISO. Second mistake, well, not really a mistake, but I had to open the aperture as wide as possible. It was at the limit of f3.5. So because of this, the footage was still very underexposed or dark. So probably what I thought was I looked at shutter speed and that was the only thing left to play around with. So I just dropped the shutter speed to a point where I thought it looked good. So what is shutter speed? Well, when light enters the lens, it has to first go through the aperture, you know, that crazy little mechanical pupil thing that opens wide. Light comes in, and then to hit the sensor, it needs to go through a shutter. Now that shutter can open and close very quickly or very slowly. So here you can see that I have a shutter speed of 1/15 of a second, which means that if you get a second and if you divide that second by 15, that amount of time is the amount of time that the shutter stays open and allows light in to hit the sensor. So in terms of cameras, I mean 1/15 of a second is actually a long time. So it stays open for a long time, you can get a brighter image, you can expose your footage more, and the light has more time to enter and then hit the sensor. But the problem is that with all the extra motion going on in the world, you know, all that motion has more time to move around and the light has more time to go through the shutter, then all of that extra motion is going to hit the sensor, and then afterwards you're going to get that kind of blurred effect. So you can see here, I mean, the footage looks kind of good enough for me, but I mean, there's a definite blur effect going on. So I think if I just raised the ISO here, I mean, I could have raised the shutter speed to 1/30th of a second or 1/60th of a second, and that would have given a more kind of natural look, you know, you would reduce the blur. Because with a fast shutter speed, when the shutter opens and closes very, very quickly, then all the, you know, it's like taking a very, very quick snapshot of the world, and that light will enter and hit the sensor. But if the shutter speed is like 2 seconds long, then you have all that extra time and motion that, you know, all of that light is going to go in and hit the sensor and give you a blur. So basically, with a very, very fast shutter speed, you're going to get a very sharp image. And with a very slow shutter speed, you're going to get a blurry image if there's a lot of motion going on. And for this footage, I was shooting at 24 frames per second, which means that there are like 24 photographs taken in 1 second to create this video footage. So you can have 24 sharp images or 24 blurry images. So for me here, I got 24 blurry images. So let's have a look at the other footage. So as you can see here, there's a faster shutter speed with 1/40th of a second, and you can see there's way less blur in the motion and movement in this footage. And the aperture was still wide open at f3.5 to let enough light in. And then with the ISO, I pushed it up to 640. And normally if you push the ISO up a lot, like, it reduces quality, but not here really. I just like that little beer, wine, whiskey thing over there. You know, it's kind of got like a little 1920s jazz kind of feeling to it. So as you can see here, I got an ISO of 400. I definitely could have gone up more. An aperture of f3.5, that's okay. But then with the shutter speed, it's very, very slow. So there's a lot of blur. So I was shooting at 24 frames per second. Now, if you double that number to get the shutter speed, so let's say like 1/50th of a second, all of this would have looked more natural. Low shutter speed to get this blur. Taipei is just such a cool little city just to go around, get lost, just wander around and get some good shots. See, what I could have done here was just drop the aperture down to f3.5. I don't know why I didn't do it, just to get more light. And, you know, I had the ISO, I could have pushed that up maybe a little more. But now, you know, with the slow shutter speed, 1/15th of a second, you know, you can see blur with that car. So as you can see here in Lightroom, I mean, I'll show you the original. And then I just did a few basic little changes here, but over there, you know, I just made it like a little, okay, let's make it warm. And then no, I just made it a little bit colder. And then over here with the vibrance, okay, taking the vibrance out and then pushing it way up to 70, that's what you get. So you could see here I pushed up the shutter speed to 1/30th of a second, make it faster so there's less blur, and then I also pushed up the ISO to 640 without any loss in quality. That's only okay. So as you can see here with this footage in Premiere Pro, I mean, that was the original, and then, you know, just turning off the FX here and then putting all the effects back, you can see up here in basic correction, you know, I just made it a little bit warmer. What was it, 38? And then over here, tint, I left that. Exposure, just raised that a little to 0.8. Contrast, nothing there. Highlights, you can see there, you know, it's kind of very bright there. So, I mean, if I raise that, it's even brighter. It's not the best, so I'll just undo that. And then with the shadows, so 45.4, if I drop that, you know, all the detail is gonna drop in the shadows. So if I just put it back to 45.4, I mean, like all the details gonna show back up. And then with the whites, let's see, that's 70, bring it down. Maybe that doesn't look too bad there, but I liked where I had it for some reason. And then coming over to creative, I went for a blue steel look, yeah. And then with the intensity, I mean, let me take it all, what's it at, 74, bring it all the way down to 0, blue steel look, and then bring it back. That's, I don't know, that's just kind of a look I like. And then, yeah, just down here, just, you know, raise the vibrance a little. What was it, 21? Now these ones here I'm pretty proud of, you know, I mean, I like these. So instead of having me ramble on for the rest of this video, I'm now gonna just let you enjoy some of the sights and sounds of Taipei.